Hi gang, and welcome back to Dr. Fitzgerald's Grammar Nuts and Bolts. Today is grammar issue number 7, unnecessary commas. A little clarity on the words unnecessary commas. Unnecessary might imply not necessary, but not necessarily unwelcome either. Like if somebody brings a cake to your party, you might say, oh, that was unnecessary. No, unnecessary comma means don't put a comma there. You're going to confuse your reader. Okay, let's get started. So to talk about unnecessary commas, it might make most sense to talk about the comma usage rules we saw in earlier videos. Use a comma with the fanboys, coordinate conjunctions, to link two independent clauses. Use a comma after an introduction leading to an independent clause. Use a comma between all items on a list of 3 or more. Use a comma between coordinate adjectives, but not cumulative adjectives. Use commas around interruptions and by-the-way information, but not around necessary or identifying information. And then we had a miscellaneous category. So if these are rules governing the usage of commas, chances are a comma is unnecessary if it's not fulfilling one of these rules that we already described in earlier videos. I hope that makes sense. These are rules for comma usage. If you're using a comma and it's not following one of these rules, you probably shouldn't be. So let's take it rule by rule. Use a comma with the fanboys to link two independent clauses. Take a look at this sentence. Ted was sure the test would be easy, and he took the rest of the night off. You have the fanboys there, and there's a comma in front of it. Should there be? Well, yes, if you have two independent clauses. Let's check. Ted was sure the test would be easy. That's an independent clause. He took the rest of the night off. That too is an independent clause. We want to keep that comma. Without that comma, we would have a run-on. But take a look at this next one. Ted was sure the test would be easy and took the rest of the night off. I see that fanboys again, and should there be a comma in front of this one? Well, do we have two independent clauses? Ted was sure the test would be easy. That's an independent clause. Took the rest of the night off is not. It doesn't have its own subject doing the verb took. So this sentence is just one person doing two verbs. Ted was and took. So there's absolutely no need for a comma here. This sentence is correct as is. Let's look at rule number 2. Use a comma after an introduction leading to an independent clause. Okay? Walking alone in the woods, Bert was frightened by a banana slug. Is walking alone in the woods an introduction? Well, is it leading to an independent clause? Bert was frightened by a banana slug. That's an independent clause. Everything to the left of Bert is an introduction leading to that independent clause. That comma is appropriate. However, walking alone in the woods can be a frightening experience. Is walking alone in the woods still an introduction? No, because can be a frightening experience is not an independent clause. In fact, the subject of the sentence is walking alone in the woods. It's part of the independent clause. So here, walking alone in the woods is not an introduction because it does not lead to an independent clause. Don't put a comma there. It's not a rule number 2. Rule number 3, use a comma between all items on a list of 3 or more. We'll skip because there's not a whole lot of opportunities for unnecessary commas in that one. So let's go on to rule number 4. Use a comma between coordinate adjectives, but not cumulative adjectives. Take a look. Dr. Fitzgerald enjoys humorous, engaging films. Here we have two adjectives modifying a noun. Humorous and engaging are modifying the noun films. Are they coordinate adjectives, meaning that they are modifying the noun separately, in which case we'll keep that comma? Or are they cumulative adjectives working together to modify the noun films, in which case we'll take the comma away? Well, recall the test. We just replace the comma with an and ask ourselves if it sounds okay. Dr. Fitzgerald enjoys watching humorous and engaging films. That sounds fine to me. These must be coordinate adjectives. Let's keep the comma. However, how about this one? Dr. Fitzgerald enjoys drinking fine vintage wines. Again, we have two adjectives modifying a noun. Fine and vintage are modifying the noun wines. Are they doing so separately or together? Well, let's do the and test again. Dr. Fitzgerald enjoys drinking fine and vintage wines. That changes the meaning of the sentence. That makes the sentence sound like Dr. Fitzgerald enjoys drinking two different types of wines. Fine wines and vintage wines. But that's not what the sentence is saying. Therefore, the adjectives are working together. They're cumulative. You don't want to put a comma in between there. It would confuse your reader. Let's move on to rule number 5. Use commas around interruptions and by-the-way information, but not around necessary or identifying information. Take a look. My eldest neighbor, who is a former detective, spies on the neighborhood from behind his curtains. So the real question here is, what role is who is a former detective playing in the sentence? Is it identifying which neighbor, or is it just extra information about the neighbor? Well, I can only have one eldest neighbor. So who is a former detective is not identifying which neighbor. It's my eldest neighbor. It must be by the way information. Those commas are appropriate. Keep them. However, my neighbor who is a former detective spies on the neighborhood from behind his curtains. Here, who is a former detective is meant to identify which neighbor. My neighbor who is a former detective, not the one who was a dentist, not the one who was an accountant, not the one who was a grammar school teacher. My neighbor who was a former detective. Yeah, that one spies on the neighborhood from behind his curtains. Since here, who is a former detective is identifying which neighbor, we don't put commas around it. Again, it would confuse your reader. So let's leave this one alone. A little more practice with rule number 5. The class that I really wanted is full versus the class which I really wanted is full. Remember we talked in an earlier video about the difference between that and which. That introduces necessary or identifying information, and which introduces interruptions or by the way information. In the first sentence, that I really wanted is identifying which class. The class that I really wanted. Yeah, that class is full. No commas here, it's identifying which class. However, the second sentence, the class which I really wanted is full. Which I really wanted is giving me extra information about the class, not identifying the class. Essentially, the second sentence is saying, the class is full, by the way, I really wanted it. So the commas are appropriate in the second sentence because they're surrounding by the way information. A quick sub-rule to rule number 5. There is no good reason to separate a subject from its verb with a single comma. Every independent clause has to have at least one subject and at least one verb. And no matter how close a subject is to its verb, or how far away a subject is from its verb, there should not be a single comma in between them. There can be no commas, there can be 2 or more commas, but there can't be one. So if you see a subject and a verb with one comma in between them, you know something went wrong. Take a look. The man whom I told you about is sitting on a park bench across the street. Well, the subject is the man, the verb is sitting. There's one comma in between the subject and the verb. I know that's wrong. So the question now becomes, whom I told you about. What role is that playing in the sentence? Well, it certainly can be identifying which man. The man whom I told you about. Remember yesterday, that guy I told you about? Yeah. He's sitting on a park bench across the street. So if it's identifying information, let's get rid of that comma. But take a look at this one. My favorite singer, Sarah Vaughan, was nicknamed the Velvet Fox. The subject of this sentence is singer, and the verb is was. I got one comma in between the subject and the verb. I know that's wrong. So should I add a comma between the subject and the verb so that I have 2, or should I take that comma away? Well, I can only have one favorite singer. Therefore, her actual name is by the way information. I think I'll add a comma. Now the sentence is essentially saying, my favorite singer was nicknamed the Velvet Fox. By the way, I'm talking about Sarah Vaughan. Okay, that's all for now. As always, thank you for watching. Goodbye.